Well, welcome to Kool-Aid Country, where we talk about the cult of the month. Carl, which cult is the apple of your eye that we want to speak about too? Like some sort of cult or popular cult-like techniques. Talk to me, Carl.
Yeah, before I criticize myself or where I came from first, before I attack anything else. But since we were talking about Tony Lambert in the last session, who was one of my favorite, not my favorite preacher of all time, but he originates from the Southern Baptist Convention. And when I got out of college, that's what I went back to. I didn't think about God all through college and most of high school, but when I thought about raising a family, I said, well, I guess I better get back in church. And the only thing I knew was Southern Baptist, and found one on the corner that was about as messed up as you could be. But is the SBC a cult? And is all churches at least cult like? And so we can talk about that also. But every time I take a deep dive into my former denomination, the Southern Baptist Convention, I just get a little more disgusted with them. They were formed because of disagreements about the issue of slavery.
Mm-hmm.
So with the Northern Baptist or General Baptist or whatever it was called before that, then they became the Southern Baptist and have changed very little over the years. They're I can't remember what it's called, what the statement of beliefs is called for them, but it's, even though they claim their churches are autonomous, they still have to assent to the Baptist faith and message. That's what it's called. Mm-hmm. It's only been changed a three times, and probably more because of the confession, some of those statements that came out, the Chicago statement and so on, where they were kind of forced into changing it a little bit. There's so many things wrong with the Southern Baptist Convention now, and it's not just cult-like, it's a cult. And I'm glad I'm not there anymore.
Well, I think they changed those statements just because as time moves on, I mean, the Southern Baptists, or what is this, like refined bigotry? Like they're like a fine wine in the ways of like bigotry and misogyny, how they've done this, and they're just like, we can do better. That's why they keep refining those statements. So like, oh, we don't want to think, we don't want to give the idea that women can preach or anything like that. Yeah, it's wild. It's wild.
In 2019, it was found that they had covered up the executive board. So the SBC is divided into several kind of governing things. There's the North American Mission Board, which is really big, and then there's the Foreign Missions Board. Then there's the Executive Council. I think I'm getting that right. The Executive Council was found, and Russell Moore was the whistleblower for that. He outed them that they had covered up abuse from 700 youth pastors in the Southern Baptist Convention. Their answer to that was, well, all of our churches are autonomous, so they get to govern themselves, and they'll have to deal with that locally. Well, what they did with it locally was send those guys to somewhere else, to another church, problem solved, and then get on down the road. Mm-hmm. But
that's the Catholic playbook.
Yeah, we're on the same page.
So I remember being in Southern Baptist Church, just railing against Catholics for the abuse and the scandals and so on. And then come to find out, many of the Southern Baptist churches are covering that up, and that they had no plans. Like today, we talk about, well, what are our plans if a sexual abuse scandal comes? How do we protect the victim? And they're starting to talk about that kind of stuff. But in at least up until 2019, the Southern Baptist Convention did not do that.
Well, they did. They had a plan of where they would send the pastor to a different church.
Yeah,
it's true.
How they would discredit the victim, things like this. So they did have a plan. It's just a more nefarious one.
Yeah, it is nefarious for sure.
Speaking of nefarious, I would like to take umbrage with Stuart talking about Kool-Aid. Please, it was Flavor Aid, sir.
Oh, Flavor Aid. Okay,
Jonestown was Flavor Aid. All right.
okay. I gotcha.
You don't mix cyanide and Kool-Aid.
That's true. It's every
Phosphorus.
time I've done it, it gives a little bit of an aftertaste. I don't like it.
That's right. You have to get, as they found out in Jonestown, you have to get the sugar mixture correct. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah, I think all of that stuff that we've been involved in is you got to balance out what you say, because to a certain extent there were regulating things about church, there was comforting things about church. There were positive things that happened, some positive community, a lot of faux community. There were some good things that happened, and certainly the love bombing in the beginning, which is a cult tendency to love bomb you on the way in, and then kind of forget about you. But they still want you to stay. Just don't cause any problems. Don't ask any questions. Stay here and fill the pews. Give me your money and your volunteer labor and all of that. So, it's not that there wasn't some good things, but it's kind of reflected in the budget. 5% of what churches get goes to things like soup kitchens and things that actually help people. And you can argue that, well, they're getting helped by listening to a sermon every week, but I don't agree with that. It's just indoctrination. It's just simple facts repeated over and over and over again at the right cadence and all of that stuff. Anyway, but the Southern Baptist Convention has a lot more problems than that.
I like how you mentioned budget too. That it reminded me of, there was something that I was always told, like when you're giving to, let's say, charities, you try to look at what is the admin fees for how much it costs to run. And so most places I've heard, I think it's you want somewhere around 10%, which is a healthy thing that goes into admin fees and the running of the whole organization and how that works. And the rest goes to what it's supposed to do. Mm-hmm. Now, I would hear this in churches about, if you're going to give your tithe, we want to make sure we're giving our tithe to a good ministry. But churches do not operate under that same guise either. To say there's 10 to 15%, which would be your admin and running fees. No, it's 60 or more of staffing
70
and building. Yeah. It where your money goes is really where you're going to put your efforts into.
70% goes to buildings and salaries, basically, and there's a bunch of little things attached to that and so on, but very little to the actual ministries. When you say something radical like, why don't you close down that second largest building in town where we all go and meet, which we shouldn't even have to do with YouTube and Zoom and all of those things. Maybe have some occasional gathering at the civic center, the convention center or something. But why are we coming here? Why can't we just turn that thing into the biggest homeless shelter, soup kitchen ever, and cut a lot of this administrative cost and the extra cost of a building? And we could, if we want to have a service, let's do it in a smaller place every once in a while, not all the time, because it ends up...
Can't be skipping
we're right.
Sundays.
God is on our side, but what we're going to be driven by is keeping this train running, even in smaller churches. So, JD, you look like you're going to say something.
No, it's
like
just
something's brewing there.
That's just all. It really is what it's all about. It's just you have to keep people ingrained. And again, back to something I said in the last segment, is it's the more you pour into it, the less likely you are to pull out of it, because it's the sunk cost fallacy, right? So it is very cult-like. But I mean, you have good one-liners from Jesus. Again, going back to these throwaway lines of, give away all your things and follow me. Mm-hmm. Now I choose to look at that more in a socialist way. We should just all share everything and be cool about that. But it seems like, again, it kind of just depends where your conclusions start, and you just work backwards from there. Because in a lot of churches, the pastors are uncomfortable because they don't want to deal with all the issues that the church is dealing with. And so they need a bunch of money because they need to buy a plane, because if they go on the normal plane, it's a tube of demons. We can't have that. So we need to get Creflo Dollar into his private plane. Otherwise, he's going to have to sit next to the demons. Now, I would argue he should probably exercise those demons, but anyway.
I think by demons he just means people that he thinks are like the dirties that are coach. He's like, get me away from these people.
People I don't associate with.
That's pretty much what
We mentioned that point in the last segment, how pastors become that way, become isolationist and stay away. The SBC has also been active recently in trying to make sure that the terrible scourge of women in the pastorate doesn't happen. And what's
I
his
think
face in
they
California
still haven't said
kind of-
that they still let them be associate pastors, right? Or at least they leave the possibility open.
Well, but you got to call it something different. You call it a director instead of a pastor.
I call it merciful. That's really nice of them.
Well, it is, because in their mind, women can only lead women and
true.
children.
Children.
You can't somehow speak to men at all from any stage or pulpit. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
We kind of, even in my Southern Baptist church that I pastored last, we kind of pushed against that. I was starting to be against that back then, and where the way we did it was to just put on the board. I rewrote the Constitution because we replanted the church. It was a legacy church, so replanted the church and rewrote the Constitution. They probably shredded it by now, but that I left. But we put all the women committee members on the board, and the people that were volunteering to run committees and do that kind of work were women. So the women were on the board. Of course, the ex-pastor that we about come to fisticuffs with later didn't like that and argued with them all the time and so on. But they were really determined. And when, what's his name, the purpose-driven Rick Warren, kind of stood up to him, I think, a little bit. But there's still, the last vote they took 61%, I think.
I think they dropped Saddleback.
Yeah,
over this issue of women in the pulpit too.
But they're still trying to determine what their lifelong goal is.
I think their lifelong goal is just to oppress women. I think they've already established that quite well.
It's clear. It's more about methodologies now. how to not lose the most followers being misogynistic pricks.
Yeah. We're missing out on so much. I think when we did the women's conference a year and a half ago, or whenever we did it, just had all women speakers. It was so rich to hear that side than to hear a bunch of guys like us, talking about the same things over and over again. But it was just refreshing to hear that side of the population that we don't hardly ever hear, especially in organized religion and especially in evangelical Christianity. That women have something to say, and it's their stories, it's their experience, it's their insight. We always admitted, even in the Southern Baptist Church, that women have great intuition, but we didn't listen to them or let them speak or anything like that. And again, they say,
it's crazy. It's almost like they're people with experiences or something.
Yeah, they're real people.
Even minds?
100% person.
And intellect?
Some to believe it or not, Stuart.
What is this, fantasy?
I know.
Paul would hate this. Paul would hate us saying this.
I think, but it goes back to what we talked about before with it's easier if you don't. It's sure a lot easier if half the population just shuts the fuck up, isn't it? It's less to deal with, and it gives you a lot easier control.
Yeah, absolutely. And
now, has anyone? Because it was making me think of this, because we were talking about like cult-like behaviors, kind of from the perspective of those that would be like adherents or people walking in, or congregants. But has anyone experienced anything cult-like behavior, like pastor to pastor type stuff, like when you get uppers in different organizations or denominations where it's not just the normal unwashed masses, it's the holiest of holies?
I remember when one of the last things that happened as a pastor was I got confronted by this ex-pastor that they had put in my congregation to help me. And he was a great helper. He's a kind-hearted guy and so on, but he was very legalistic, learned everything he knew from an old military guy that was real legalistic. But when we kind of came to, when all that kind of came to a head, I went to talk to the director of missions and the leaders of the association. And he pretty much just dismissed all of it, and said, well, there was another thing where more people showed up at the meeting in a different incident where they just said, well, let's kind of figure out a way to go along so we can keep this moving because you're doing good work and all that. And then he kind of said the same thing again when this guy that's in my church that's causing issues, just challenging me on anything he, they didn't back me up, but yet they wanted to keep the trains running. So there's a lot of tap dancing and, justifying and, I guess you go back to the sovereignty of God and then God's going to work this out and God will fix it. And let's just keep going. We got to keep the thing going. That's the main thing. But the organization always comes first.
Mm-hmm.
In an organization, the people come last. Even the pastors kind of get run over at times just because we want to keep the whole thing running. Does that make any sense?
Probably more true for smaller churches too, because I think those tend to be cult-like in the sense of the organization is the cult, as opposed to like larger cults, both real, like, I don't know, traditionally what we think of as cults and like mega churches is that it becomes about one person. Mm-hmm. Whereas there might be a leader, because if you look at, for instance, like I was talking about Jonestown earlier, when the People's Temple was small, there was actually a lot of times when Jim Jones would lose a bunch of his followers to other like wishy-washy, like kind of cult-like churches. But once it got super big, he extracted everyone out and it became all about him. It was no longer about the People's Temple. It wasn't about anything except for Jim Jones. And I feel like because I've never been a pastor, thank God. But seeing it in small towns, there's a lot of that kind of spreading rumor and things like that to try to siphon off little pieces. And it is also about the leader, but it's less so about that. It's just about our belief system and things like that. But I think there might be kind of like levels to it like that. That is just from what I've seen. Have you experienced anything like that, Stuart?
You're making me think of, okay, so the story sounds ridiculous to some degree, just my beginning of it. But so I was at a pastor's conference in Vegas. It's a great place for pastors' conferences. Yeah. And so I had a denomination send me to one, and a friend of mine from seminary was like in a dueling, they weren't really dueling, but a dueling conference or something that was going on the same time. And mine had ended, and he was like, "Oh, come! I'll get you in on this." And this is like a pastors only kind of a thing. And let's see,
I wish more pastors would duel, though.
Oh, that would be
that would be awesome, right?
Is it just like back to back, take 5 steps and throw your Bible?
The fat preachers up there dueling each other.
So I'm at this other one, and it's denominally like this is more, we're gonna say more Pentecostal charismatic is this other conference I'm going to, and it's only for like special pastors. And my friend brought me in on this, and I'm going like, I mean, I've got time to kill. Let's do this. And so it was like a night where they only they sent everyone else away, and only like the leadership pastors were having theirs. And so they had people like Ed Young Jr., who's a total creep and a fraud, and these other venerated people on stage. They were like, these are the guys with the hot hands. These are the guys that know stuff, and they're going to tell you smaller guys how to eventually become these bigger guys. And one of the pastors is like, "Oh, I feel the Spirit of the Lord coming on me." And he's telling me everyone is going to come down here and get hands laid on in this crowd. And it's probably like 200 pastors are a part of this. So this isn't the hugest thing. And they start playing the music as they do. And since I'm my friend has us like, we're on like the second row because he knows the guy. Because that's half of being a lot of pastors in these circles. Yeah. Oh, I know him. he signed my pastor's license. I don't know, Carl. We go with it. But so we're there, and they start doing the music's playing, it's going in, and I'm just like, just close my eyes and act like I'm praying because I just want to get out of here and get back to my hotel room. And it's like, and they're like, we need everyone down here. Then I kind of start doing like the pray and look around, and I was like, oh crap, there's more of them are going down. But I was like, I'm not going down. And like, I'm not really big into like the idea of like, I think a lot of this is just horse shit, like the laying on hands and a lot of like the grift that they do with it. But also in my mind, I don't want them to touch me because I also just feel like this is just weird. And so music keeps playing and they keep playing.
They want you to go down.
They keep playing and I'm just sitting there. And then I notice I'm the only one not down there. So you've got people that are like falling on the ground. They're laying stuff over them, laying hands. And I'm just like, I'm not going down there because I am not. And that's maybe part of me that I'm not a joiner a lot of times. And then eventually they're just like, well, yeah, it's been a great night tonight. And then the whole thing like finally finishes. And I'm just like, mm-hmm. And my friend's like, are you okay? I was like, yeah, I'm just not part of groupthink that I need to somehow feel the spirit move me down here that I need to. I just felt like it was so manipulative. But it's like that cult like behavior, that idea, that pressure, like even SBCs, the pressure of that altar call of getting people down there.
There's like a peer pressure to it. I was also going to say at the beginning of that, when you were talking about you have the powerful people on stage and they're telling you, we can teach you how to do this thing if you just kick up the money to us and you come to our conferences. It almost reminds me of some sort of like 3-dimensional triangle scheme or something. I don't know if there's a word for that, like maybe like a pyramid or scheme or something. Similar, but it's I remember the first time I went to one of the bigger churches in St. Joe, and that was because we were very much like the, you sit and pray and it's stuffy and uncomfortable Baptists rather than like the Pentecostal types. But I remember seeing people speak in tongues for the first time, and I was just like, what in the fuck is going on? And they were like, come into our group. And I'm like, I don't want like you. I don't want them. No, don't touch me. Don't touch me like that. I don't, and I'm not going to do the like thing. I don't do this. Thank you though. But it was that thing. That was all that was really off-putting to me. But again, people get really invested in it because you're talking about the music, and you have music is one. Another one that's very important is you have the key phrases, the key words, the cult language that everyone uses. I think as we go along, we can talk about all these things specifically, but it's all those pieces. Then you put them all together and you get a cult.
Yeah, in our newest book, we write about hypnosis as a somatic therapy, as an effective somatic therapy. But also, when you look at that really closely, at hypnosis, and you look at how we do modern religion, it's almost exactly the same. The state you've got to be in to receive hypnotic suggestions, that trance, is exactly what churches do. The key changes, the music, the things JD was mentioning, it's really about getting you in the right state where they can tell you what they want you to remember and tell you again next week and tell you again next week and tell you again next week. So that
and take your money every week.
And then extract your money. It's the con of the theologian. I don't just want to think about new suggestions, new ideas, new theology. I don't just want to investigate that. I want to investigate it, and then it's so I'm God's man, I'm appointed, so I want to then stand up on stage and I want you to pay me like a celebrity. People say, well, that's just like celebrities. Well, yeah, but it's not really a pastor. So I want you to pay me, and I want you to keep coming back and pay me, and like you said, coming to my conferences and all those things. So
it feels like and it feels like that it's like late stage Elvis, where you're just touring around playing the hits, like it just kind of feels like that. It's like you're not even trying, but since it is consumeristic, we have to give them what they expect. You mentioned like new theologies or like I'm wrestling with this kind of stuff. No, that pastors will not do that. That's chaos. We have to give them that.
Yeah.
We go to McDonald's, we expect a Big Mac, we expect diarrhea, we expect those things that we get from those places.
You could write a blog about that, Stuart. No wrestling in church, right?
So,
but we'll do toxic men's events and centered around a WWF type of format, and talk about this alpha male, and then do alpha male boot camps now, which is all the more ridiculous. We need to talk about that someday.
Yeah.
Well, it's just expanding it all out. What I thought about was when you put a bookshop and a coffee shop in, which you don't have to change your theology for that. It's still all capitalist. It's just making us more money. But
speaking of this, I'm
keeping people there.
I'm curious from all of ours, what are those things when we talk about cults for each of us? Like, what are those things that send our spidey senses tingling? Our BS meter goes off the charts. Like, what are those things that we notice? Because everyone's going to have different ones, that set them off. But like stepping into a cult, I didn't know if anyone has those that are just.
I have something pulled up, Stuart, if it's all right.
Yeah.
So I think it pleases the court.
I'm not going to tell you my source because JD's big on sources.
But I want the DOI of that so I can allegedly download it later.
Yeah, it's. I'm not going to admit what it is, but
we can see it on your glasses.
Yeah, I was going to say I see the TikTok video playing right now.
These are the characteristics of cults. This is one list. I'm not vouching that it's the ultimate list, but it should give you some idea. Cult have many characteristics, including, number one, a charismatic leader. Charismatic figure is considered a genius, prophet, or messiah. The leader is the source of power of authority, and members worship them without question. Authoritative control. Cults have an authoritarian structure with no accountability. Leaders have extreme control over the members' lives, what they eat, wear, do, and so on. Isolation. Cults isolate members from family and friends, discourage them from having outside contact. Extreme beliefs, mind-altering practices, deprivation, chanting, so on. Love bombing, which we certainly experience. New members are often showered with praise and love to make them feel like they belong. Then there's abuse. Cults can be abusive, economically, sexually, and other ways. They promote unreasonable fears about the world outside, such as evil conspiracies or impending catastrophe, second coming of Christ, etc. Belief in the leader. Cult members believe that the leader is always right and is the exclusive source of truth. Or like Knothead in the tent, whatever his name was, I forget his name, who says, even when I'm wrong, I'm right because I'm your pastor. Belief in former followers. Cult members believe that former followers are always wrong and left for no legitimate reason, and so on. Anyway, that's all I have.
I think we've cleaned it up. I guess we got to end the podcast because churches tick none of those boxes.
Yep, our work's done.
So, Dad, off that list, what is the, like, to Stuart's question, what is the one that you would notice first if you were in a church and you saw one of those things? What do you think would be the one that would get you like, something's off?
I was trying to go back to my list. I can't even find it.
Control-Shift-Tab if you close the tab.
I think it all falls under authoritative control. We're right. God is on our side. The pastor's right because we brought him here. He's God's man. He speaks directly to God. It's that authoritative control. You don't really need to question the pastor. The pastor's already been checked out by God, and our ragtag pastor search committee that may or may not be qualified to analyze someone's personality or their mental health or anything like that. But it's authoritative. It's control, and it's based out of fear. I believe it comes from the first popes Was it Leo or somebody like that said, we got to get this thing under control. It's people are liking this, following Jesus and sharing our shit and all that stuff. And I don't know if we can cuss on here. So
I already did
Oops.
a lot. How do we franchise it is the question we need to get to. How do we franchise this thing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We get and when it works and makes us money, we want more.
Mm-hmm.
And we need more because we're doing the right thing and God's on our side and we're right. So
it's always nice to
what
justify
about you? What stuck out to you?
Yeah.
You guys.
For me, I feel like I kind of thought that's what you'd say first of all, is because you pay a lot of attention to pastors being one for so long. For me, I think it's like a lot of the language when I go somewhere and I see everyone using like the same, like, which happens. I mean, it's just, that's how linguistics works. It's like even in your friend groups, you form like these kind of weird, like homogeny of the language. But like when it's like that and everyone uses the same one, the same language over and over again, and it's repeated, it almost gets to the point you said about like chanting. That usually gets my heebie-jeebies going. Yeah, I think that's the biggest one for me. What about you, Stuart?
A couple I thought of, but one of them is people that are all overly like excited and happy. Like just that kind of like we're tweaked for no good reason. Like, hi, we're so excited to be here.
Yeah.
And that one, another physical one that I just remember this, circling back to the SBC. Johnny Hunt was a pastor that has gone to the news and having a bunch of different issues, sexual issues. His church was, I grew up from 5 miles away from his big Southern Baptist mega church. And I remember going in there once because my parents were looking for churches. We only lasted once there, thankfully. But he had on stage, like he had a different chair because I forget about this. Like in a lot of Southern Baptists in the South, especially, the pastors will like sit on the stage the entire time.
Oh, yeah.
So they'll have like seats to the side. And Johnny Hunt's was, I kid you not, it was spray golden, and so it was larger than the other associate seats. So it just kind of felt like, I don't know, like
a lot of times they look like thrones.
It felt medieval a bit too to see. Yes, the rest of you, where is my wine taster? During worship. But it was, even as like, I remember as like a 12-year-old kid just feeling that looks weird in that place because it almost looked worshipful having him held up there.
Yeah.
Well, he was the president of the Southern Baptist Convention, wasn't he?
I think for a time period. Yeah.
It all comes back.
Carl, you mentioned this question and I'm curious about this because this may like within cults, because it does make sense in the cult, but you mentioned that charismatic about people that cults need to have a charismatic leader. To some degree, I've been around a bunch of charismatic like pastors, and I'm going to call BS on some of that. I feel like somehow like being charismatic is very subjective, or people have a low bar on it. But I mean, a lot of pastors I've been around that even have a good following and stuff, I'm like, I don't get it. I don't know. Maybe it's just because I don't have the riz that they do.
Maybe communicator is a better word, and I didn't write that list. So
no, I'm not saying that. But I think, that is standard, and it's like they're charismatic for, I guess, a group of people that find them charismatic.
Yeah. We were wrestling. When Laura and I were wrestling with finding our voice, I wanted Laura to write that chapter, and in whichever book it's in, she wrote first because we thought, well, she didn't have a voice as a pastor's wife. Well, I always did because I was a pastor, but that's not even true because, as you know, Stuart, you defrocked pastor, you can only go so far in what you say. In essence, you're trying to be challenging and confrontive to people, but you're also trying to tell them what they already want to hear. You want to challenge them in what they already believe they should be doing, right? So there's guardrails to it, and you can't, even as a pastor, speak your mind. So you've got to be able to, like Tony was doing, use those cadences and that rhythm to kind of tell people what, give them an out. That's what he's doing. He's giving all of his followers an out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's don't do like you guys have mentioned already in the last episode. Don't do the hard work of getting better. Don't because God, whatever happens, it's God's plan, and so you're going to fall back into the narrative of the congregation in a challenging sort of way.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? So
Mm-hmm.
they want someone that can challenge them. They like that at first, helping me get off alcohol, or help me, get back to my job or something like that. But then he's going to keep challenging you, but he's always challenging you in a way that you can hear,
Mm-hmm.
and that's acceptable to you.
Like
So,
a comfortable challenge.
yeah.
Not too bad.
It doesn't really
That's
involve
my
much
take.
change.
It could be wrong, but
I was going to say also, like, I'm now once I talked about Flavor Aid, now I'm on Jonestown. But if you listen to the later, if you listen to like the later Jonestown tapes, which I don't recommend because it's very bizarre and unnerving. But he would just it's exactly what both of you have talked about. Of it's the music, it's the cadence of how it goes. It's the certain trigger words that get people, but it's just over and over, and you just keep droning on. So I think to your question, Stuart, is like it doesn't have to be charismatic in the way we think of like a pastor
Mm-hmm.
like Martin Luther King or a great speaker, but it's familiar. It's almost in the same way because psychologically our brains like patterns, right? So he can start something. It's the call and the response, right? I remember, Dad, you would do a lot of, you do the call and response in church, and people like that because they know what they're supposed to respond. They know the right answer. If I'm in school and the kids are having a bad day, I ask them questions I know they know the answer to because they get, boom, dopamine hit, serotonin going. All right, now I feel good.
Yeah.
I know the answer. I'm smart.
point.
I'm capable, and I'm part of a group too. I think that's what it is. Is it doesn't necessarily have to be classically charismatic, but it's they know the right rhythms and the right beats to hit at the right time.
It plays on our need to, we have a deep need for connection. So create a folk community. Like I said, all the things JD just said, really important. Yeah.
Because it's very hard once you become part of an insulated community to ever leave it. And I think at that point, then you just make, you just kind of just allow things because this is my community. This is my family. And
We could talk a lot more about Southern Baptist churches because they've doubled down on their racism. They're totally against critical race theory, which they don't even understand. But yet they made a proclamation that you can't serve God and have anything to do with critical race theory, which is JD could talk a half hour on that. I think.
So from my southern seat, you're starting to sound like a real supporter of the war of northern aggression, sir. Yeah, it's
the places I'm familiar with, churches are still segregated, and we're in Nebraska, and we're near Nebraska, where it's kind of still really conservative, but sometimes more open.
You're currently living in a former slave state too.
True. And right on the Kansas, Missouri places where we're at now was in the middle, I guess, kind of, but still pretty like that. But they do, and they're doubling down on their misogyny, how they treat women, the racism, all of that stuff. And one of the things I saw in Pew Research kind of analyzed how conservative, how far right are these different denominations, and the Southern Baptist is always the furthest right, and on a lot of different kind of spectrums. So that article I think I sent you guys is pretty helpful.
So you're just saying that they're groundbreaking, that they're continuing to pave their own goals on the edge of the spectrum of just
they're pioneer.
Yeah. We can do better, guys. We can do better.
We can get closer to fascism every day.
Yeah, they're pioneers in abuse and neglect and cover up, for sure.
Hey,
that's my opinion.
At least they're the best at something.
I was gonna say, still get the first place medal at some point.
And and I look at somebody like Tony, who used to be my friend. and just say, but that's such a toxic way to start. And that's their starting point,
Mm-hmm.
is just that God, if it happened, God wanted it to happen because God's in control, because we assumed 1,500 years ago that God was in control. So we're going to keep going with that. We know it's hurting people. We know people's lives are destroyed, but we're going to keep segregating black people over into their own black churches and Chinese churches and all that. We're going to keep segregating people and keep doubling down on racism and misogyny and all these things. We're going to try to keep women out of the pulpit. God help us, And they're just so determined
Hmm.
to
Well,
stay that way.
it's one, the need for control, but it's also the literal definition of xenophobia. They're just afraid. They don't know what that's going to be, so they don't really want to pioneer because what they've been doing has been working. And I mean, you look at who's in leadership in the government as well now. It's kind of going their way, so they might as well keep going down that path.
My personal condemnation would be that that whole group of the North American Mission Board is determined to start something new, and they just keep starting new shit. And we did one of those, started an old dying church and restarted it.
That's what I was going to say. Is you were replanting churches,
Replanting, and that's
which
kind
is
of that was our MO. But
yeah,
in
I
the
dug up a
end,
tree and put it back in.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and in the end, we would look back and go, we really didn't change that much. Because like we said before, people don't like to change, and they don't like really being challenged as much as they say they do. It's gonna morph back into about what it was before, even if you replant it. That's just been my experience, and it's just because of that dogmatic approach they have to everything.
I have a lot of plants outside. I've replanted some of them. None of them have turned from like a bamboo plant into a cherry tree or something. It doesn't usually change very much.
Yeah,
Sometimes it gets a little bigger. I could sell it for a little bit more money, but that's about it.
yeah. And generally, when you replant forest and so on, they're not growing in the right way, and they grow faster. They actually grow too fast in a replanted forest. It doesn't go, the covering. It's complicated, but that'd be fun to talk about sometime.